Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi there, Herman and Corn. So I woke up today with a horrible sore throat, and now I just spend most of the day feeling kind of really feverish and just not very well. And my wife feels like she's coming down with something as well. My question is, we are, two adults, and we're the only caretakers for our 7-month son, Ezra. I guess in some situations you have relatives or kind of backup support. We're the care team basically. So my question is, in a situation like this, what are the recommendations for what to do? Because we obviously, we have to keep the show on the road. We have to. My wife is, feeding him and changing, doing all the usual stuff, but I obviously don't want him to catch anything or make him sick. What is the protocol in this situation? There's, a lot of guidelines about if you have another person or if you have a big enough home to, put up some kind of separation. I've read all these kind of suggestions that are great if you have a large place and sort of a extended family support network. But what are you supposed to do if it's just two people? Any guidelines as specific as possible that you can give us around stuff like hand washing, if we can hug? I assume we can't hug, but just like what to do in this situation would be much appreciated. Thank you, Herman and Corn.
So, we have a bit of a crisis in the house today. If you could hear the sound of tea kettles whistling and the constant rustle of tissue boxes, you would know exactly what I am talking about. Our housemate Daniel and his wife are both down for the count. They've got the classic sore throat and fever combo, and they are currently navigating one of the most stressful scenarios for any new parent.
It is a rough one. Herman Poppleberry here, by the way. And yeah, seeing them try to manage a 7-month-old baby while feeling like they have been run over by a freight train is honestly heroic. Daniel reached out because, as they are the sole caregivers and do not have family right around the corner here in Jerusalem, they are basically in survival mode. They want to know the actual protocols for keeping little Ezra safe while they are essentially viral factories.
It is such a common predicament, but when you are in the thick of it, the brain fog from the fever makes it really hard to think through the logistics. You want to cuddle the baby because he is cute and probably confused why mom and dad are moving in slow motion, but you are also terrified that every breath you take is a risk. So, Herman, let us really dig into this. What does the research say about the best way to handle this when you have zero backup?
Right. The first thing to understand is the concept of the viral load and the modes of transmission. With a sore throat and fever, we are likely looking at something respiratory, like the flu, a bad cold, or even the latest variant of whatever is going around in early 2026. These primarily spread through respiratory droplets, which are the bigger particles we cough or sneeze out, and aerosols, which are the tiny ones that just hang out in the air. But then you have fomites, which is the fancy scientific word for contaminated surfaces.
Okay, so let us start with the surfaces. If Daniel is touching his nose or coughing into his hand and then picking up a toy or changing a diaper, that is a direct line to Ezra. How extreme do they need to be with the hand washing?
It has to be rigorous. We are talking about the 20-second scrub every single time you transition from yourself to the baby, before you pick him up, before you prep a bottle, after you blow your nose. It sounds exhausting when you have a fever, but it is the single most effective barrier. One thing that people often forget is the cell phone. Think about how much we touch our phones while we are lying in bed feeling sick, and then we pick up the baby. That phone is a concentrated petri dish of whatever you have.
That is a great point. I bet they are checking their temperatures or looking up symptoms on their phones constantly. So, a protocol of sanitizing the phone with an alcohol wipe or just keeping it away from the nursery entirely seems like a smart move. But what about the physical contact? Daniel asked about the hugging. Ezra is 7 months old. He is at that age where he is very interactive and needs that physical reassurance. Can they actually hug him?
This is where the emotional reality hits the scientific protocol. Ideally, you would maintain distance, but that is impossible for a 7-month-old who needs to be fed, changed, and comforted. The recommendation from most pediatric associations is what I call the masked hug. If you have to be within 6 feet of the infant, you should be wearing a high-quality mask. I am talking about an N95 or a KN95 if you have them. A simple cloth mask is better than nothing, but it is not going to do much against those finer aerosols when you are holding a baby right against your chest.
And I imagine the fit of the mask is crucial there. If you are leaning over a crib and the mask is gapping at the nose, those droplets are just falling right onto the baby. It feels a bit clinical and maybe a little scary for a baby to see their parents in masks all day. But at 7 months, they're usually okay with it, as long as the voice is familiar, right?
Exactly. Use your voice to bridge that gap. Talk to him, sing to him, let him know it is still you under there. And when it comes to the hugging, try to keep his face away from your face. Instead of the cheek-to-cheek cuddle, maybe hold him facing away from you, or keep a burp cloth between your clothes and his skin. Viruses can live on fabric for a surprising amount of time. Some studies show that influenza viruses can persist on non-porous surfaces for 24 to 48 hours, and on tissues or clothing for about 8 to 12 hours.
12 hours on clothing is significant. So, if Daniel is wearing the same sweatshirt he has been coughing into all morning and then picks up Ezra, that is a problem. Should they be changing their clothes every time they interact with him? That seems like a lot of laundry for 2 sick people.
It is a lot of laundry. A more practical approach is the designated baby smock. Keep a clean button-down shirt or a large t-shirt hanging by the nursery door. When you go in to care for him, throw that on over your sick clothes. When you are done, take it off and leave it there. It creates a relatively clean outer layer that protects the baby from the viral particles that have settled on your pajamas.
That is a brilliant, low-energy hack. I love that. Now, let us talk about the feeding. Daniel mentioned his wife is also sick. If she is breastfeeding, that adds a whole other layer of complexity. Is the virus passed through the milk, or is it just the physical proximity that is the danger?
For the vast majority of respiratory illnesses, the virus is not found in the breast milk itself. In fact, the milk is actually the baby's best defense right now because the mother's body is already producing antibodies to whatever she has, and she is passing those directly to Ezra. It is like a personalized vaccine being delivered in real time. The risk, however, is the respiratory transmission while the baby is at the breast.
Right, because the baby's face is inches away from the mother's nose and mouth. So, the protocol there would be the same. A mask and very thorough hand washing before the feeding starts.
Precisely. Wash the hands, wash the chest area if there has been any coughing, and wear that N95. If the mother is too weak or the fever is too high to safely hold the baby, she could pump and have Daniel feed him the bottle, assuming Daniel is feeling slightly better. But then you have the issue of sanitizing the pump parts. Everything that touches the milk or the baby's mouth needs to be sterilized. We are talking about boiling water or a steam sterilizer after every single use.
I can hear Daniel groaning from across the house at the thought of more cleaning. But it really is about breaking those chains of transmission. You mentioned the air earlier, aerosols hanging in the room. If they are all trapped in the house together, how do they manage the air quality? Jerusalem can get pretty chilly in February, so I doubt they want to leave all the windows wide open.
You do not need to leave them all open, but even a 5-minute flush of fresh air in the main living areas every hour can significantly reduce the viral concentration. If they have a HEPA air purifier, now is the time to crank it up to the highest setting and move it into whatever room the baby is in. If not, even a simple fan pointed out a window can help pull that stale viral air out of the room. Think of it like diluting a drop of ink in a bucket of water. The more fresh air you bring in, the less concentrated the virus becomes.
That makes sense. It is all about risk mitigation, not necessarily total elimination. Because, as Daniel said, they are the only ones there. They cannot just stop being parents. Let us talk about the baby's environment. 7-month-olds are notorious for putting everything in their mouths. What should they be doing about the toys and the surfaces Ezra touches?
This is where you have to be strategic. You do not have the energy to bleach the whole house. Focus on the high-touch surfaces. The crib rails, the high chair tray, the changing table, and any toys he is currently obsessed with. Use a simple disinfecting wipe or a solution of water and a little bit of soap. You do not need harsh chemicals for everything, but you do need to be consistent. If you cough near his play mat, that mat needs a wipe down.
And what about their own recovery? I feel like we often focus so much on the baby that the parents neglect themselves, which just makes the whole ordeal last longer. If they are both running fevers, they are going to be dehydrated and exhausted.
That is a huge part of the protocol. If the parents collapse, the baby is in real trouble. They need to be alternating their rest periods if possible. Even if they are both sick, maybe one person takes the 2-hour shift while the other literally closes their eyes in a different room. Hydration is non-negotiable. For the parents, they should be pushing fluids like it is their job. Electrolyte drinks, broth, water, and they should be taking fever reducers like acetaminophen or ibuprofen on a schedule to keep their own temperatures manageable so they can actually function.
I remember reading something about the danger of parents being impaired by medication, or just sheer exhaustion while caring for an infant. Is there a safety concern there?
Absolutely. There is a real risk of falling asleep while holding the baby, especially if they are taking cold and flu meds that cause drowsiness. My advice to Daniel and his wife would be to avoid those multi-symptom nighttime meds during the day. Stick to the basic fever reducers, and if you feel yourself nodding off while feeding or rocking Ezra, put him in his crib. It is much safer for him to cry for a few minutes in a safe crib than for a sick medicated parent to drop him or accidentally roll over on him.
That is such an important point. The crib is the safest place when you are at your limit. Now, let us look at the other side of this. What should they be looking for in Ezra? At 7 months, how do they know if he's actually caught it and when it becomes an emergency?
This is where you have to be a keen observer. In an infant, the first signs of illness are often subtle. They might become more fussy or conversely, unusually lethargic. But the big things to watch are his breathing and his hydration. If you see his ribs pulling in when he breathes, which we call retractions, or if his nostrils are flaring, that is a sign of respiratory distress, and you need to call the doctor immediately.
And hydration is measured by wet diapers, right?
Yes, for a 7-month-old, you want to see at least 5 to 6 heavy wet diapers in a 24-hour period. If that drops off, or if his mouth looks dry and he has no tears when he cries, he is getting dehydrated. Also, keep an eye on the fever. For a baby that age, any fever over 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius warrants a call to the pediatrician just to get their specific guidance.
It feels like a lot to manage, but when you break it down, it is really about 4 main pillars: hand hygiene, masking during close contact, air circulation, and vigilant monitoring. It is a marathon, not a sprint.
It really is. And I think there is a psychological component too. You have to accept that the house is going to be a mess, the laundry is going to pile up, the dishes will stay in the sink. That is okay. The goal is simply to keep Ezra healthy and get the parents back on their feet. If that means Ezra gets a little more screen time or spends more time in his playpen than usual so the parents can rest, that is a perfectly valid survival strategy.
I think Daniel will be relieved to hear that. He is a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to the house. But in this scenario, the perfection is in the prevention, not the tidiness. I am curious about the long-term effects of this kind of isolation. When you do not have family nearby, the stress of these moments can really compound. Have you seen any research on the impact of parental illness on infant development in these short bursts?
Most studies suggest that as long as the basic needs are met, these short periods of parental illness do not have any long-term negative effects on development. Babies are remarkably resilient. What they need most is a calm environment. If the parents are stressed and panicking, the baby picks up on that. So, even though they feel terrible, trying to maintain a soothing tone of voice and a predictable routine as much as possible helps the baby feel secure even if things look a little different.
That is a good reminder. The routine is the anchor, even if the routine is now performed by someone in a mask who smells like menthol rub. Now, before we move on, I want to go back to the misconception busting. A lot of people think that once everyone in the house is sick, you might as well just give up on the protocols because the germs are already everywhere. Why is that wrong?
That is one of the most dangerous myths. It is called the viral load. Even if Ezra has already been exposed, reducing his ongoing exposure can mean the difference between him getting a mild case and a severe one. If you keep pumping more virus into his environment, his immune system has a much harder time keeping up. Every time you wash your hands or wear a mask, you are reducing the amount of virus he has to fight off. It is never too late to start the protocols.
That is a powerful way to frame it. You are not just preventing the start of an illness. You are potentially mitigating the severity of it. It is like being in a room with a small fire. Just because there is a fire doesn't mean you should start throwing gasoline on it. You still want to minimize the smoke and the heat as much as possible.
Exactly, and the same goes for the parents. If they keep passing the virus back and forth or getting reinfected with different strains, their recovery takes longer. It is a closed-loop system in that house right now, and they need to break the cycle.
So, to recap the specific protocol for Daniel and his wife. 1. Hand washing is the absolute baseline. 20 seconds every time you touch the baby or his things. 2. High-quality masks like N95s whenever you are within 6 feet of Ezra, especially during feedings and diaper changes. 3. Use a clean outer layer like a smock or a designated shirt when handling the baby. 4. Keep the air moving, even if it is just a brief window opening or using an air purifier. 5. Sterilize everything that goes into his mouth. And 6. Prioritize parental rest and hydration so you don't burn out.
That is a solid list. And I would add one more, communication. Since they are both sick, they need to be very clear with each other about how they are feeling. If one person feels their fever spiking or they are getting dizzy, they need to speak up immediately so the other can take over. This is not the time for powering through in silence.
Definitely. It is a team effort. You know, it is interesting you mentioned the air purifier. I was reading a paper recently about the efficacy of those small portable HEPA filters in residential settings. They found that in a standard-sized bedroom, a good purifier can reduce the concentration of aerosolized particles by up to 90% in less than half an hour. That is a massive reduction when you are talking about a confined space like a nursery.
It really is. It is basically an electronic mask for the room. And for people who do not have a fancy purifier, there is always the Corsi Rosenthal box. It is a DIY version made with a box fan and 4M ERV13 filters taped together. It is incredibly effective and much cheaper than the commercial units. Probably too much work for Daniel to build right now while he has a fever, but for anyone listening who wants to be prepared for future sick days, it is a great weekend project.
I remember when those became popular a couple of years ago. It is amazing how much a little bit of physics can do for public health. Speaking of physics, what about the humidity in the house? I know a lot of people reach for the humidifier when they are sick. Does that help or hurt in this situation?
It is a double-edged sword. Humidity can help soothe a sore throat and keep nasal passages moist, which is good for the parent's comfort. However, some viruses actually thrive in higher humidity, while others prefer dry air. The sweet spot is usually between 40 and 60%. If it gets too humid, you risk mold growth or making the air feel heavy and stagnant. If they use one, they need to make sure it is cleaned daily. Otherwise, they are just aerosolizing bacteria along with the moisture.
Right. The last thing they need is a secondary infection from a dirty humidifier. It really seems like the theme here is clean and lean. Do the essential chores, keep the hygiene high, and let everything else slide.
Exactly. And honestly, for Daniel and his wife, they should also remember to be kind to themselves. It is incredibly stressful to be sick while caring for a baby. The guilt of what if I make him sick can be overwhelming. But they are doing their best in a tough situation. That emotional stress can actually suppress your own immune system, so taking a deep breath and accepting the situation is part of the recovery process.
That is a great point. The mental health aspect of parenting in isolation is something we have touched on in past episodes, but it really comes to the forefront during a health crisis. If you are feeling overwhelmed, it is okay to reach out to friends for a porch drop-off. Even if they cannot come inside to help, having someone bring over a hot meal or some extra supplies can be a huge morale booster.
Absolutely. We should probably see if we can get some soup delivered to their door later today.
Definitely. We will take care of the housemates. But for our listeners, I think this protocol is a great blueprint for anyone in this no backup scenario. It is about being smart with your limited energy.
and being proactive. Do not wait until you are both at 103 degrees to figure out who is doing the next feeding. Plan it out during the up periods when the fever reducers are kicking in.
Well, Herman, I think we have given Daniel and his wife a lot to work with. It is a tough spot to be in, but with these protocols, they have a much better chance of keeping Ezra in the clear. And for everyone else out there, maybe this is a good reminder to stock up on those N95s and alcohol wipes before the next bug hits your household.
Always be prepared. It makes the actual crisis a lot less chaotic.
Truly. Well, if you found this helpful, or if you have your own sick parent survival tips, we would love to hear them. You can always get in touch through the contact form at myweirdprompts.com. We really value the insights our listeners bring to these discussions.
We really do. And if you have a second, leaving a review on Spotify or your favorite podcast app is a huge help for us. It helps other parents and curious minds find the show.
It really does. We've been doing this for over 500 episodes now, and the community that has grown around My Weird Prompts is just incredible. We appreciate every single one of you.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us today in the midst of our household infirmary.
We will keep you updated on Daniel and Ezra. But for now, that is our show. You can find all our past episodes and our RSS feed at myweirdprompts.com.
Stay healthy out there, everyone.
And keep those hands washed. Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. We will see you in the next one.
Bye for now.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.